So, I've just finished watching Echo from Marvel Studios. Now, while it's not quite as convoluted as The Marvels, where you need to have watched a whole bunch of other stuff to even have a vague clue who anyone is or what's going on, the beginning of this show feels a bit like that. They do a really good job of recapping what has come before by editing old and new content together. But I clocked it as I was wondering when the story would begin in the present. The first 24 minutes of episode 1, which is only 50 minutes, is basically recap. It's background information to get you up to speed. When your show is 5 episodes long, that's kind of worrying. That's a problem that the makers of the show had to solve because they're part of the MCU, which means you have to have watched a bunch of other stuff before the current show makes any kind of sense. Being a little generous, the first 5 minutes or so made me think that Disney Plus had glitched, as it was some kind of sci-fi movie, maybe something like The Eternals again.
No, God! No! God, please, no!
But thankfully, it was not that. This was something else entirely. It was the ancient story and the history of the Choctaw people. So what does any of that have to do with a street-level urban crime TV show about a deaf protagonist battling against her uncle and his criminal empire? The answer is not a lot to the story, except where they try to crowbar in far too much. And that's part of the problem with Echo. It's a show of two halves. It's trying to do too much with too little time. With only 5 episodes, time is really short. You've already lost the first half of episode 1 with a 20-minute recap to get people up to speed that didn't watch Daredevil and Hawkeye, and they've packed in so much, nothing has time to breathe. Important character moments are cut short. Touching emotional beats are skimmed over, so we struggle to get attached to any characters and therefore care much about their fate. We've got veteran actors like Graham Greene and Tantu Cardinal who do their best with what they have, but apart from one slightly touching scene between Maya and Green Scully, he kind of dips in and out. There's also Zahn McClarnon, who I know most of all from things like Longmire, Doctor Sleep and Westworld, and he does have some good emotional scenes as Maya's father, but he's probably the only one. Once he dies, she's cut off emotionally from pretty much everyone, which does make her quite a cold character. Now of course, not every show needs a 10-minute scene, where characters just sit down and tell each other their feelings while crying and hugging it out. But this show is all about family, and the family we make versus the one we're born with. It's about loss and sisters, kind of, but we don't have enough time with Bonnie and Maya to really get into that. To address the elephant in the room, the show obviously features a deaf Native American main character with a prosthetic limb. And this is the first for any Marvel TV show or film. It's handled extremely well, but the character is not just defined by their deafness. Obviously, the show is different. It has to be, and communication is an important element of this show because you have an actress who is actually deaf, so she almost never speaks. Everyone she speaks with on the show can use ASL, American Sign Language, or they've been taught to do it. Where the show is really clever is that it often shows viewers May's perspective of the world by playing with sound. Sometimes fight scenes or even dialogue scenes between other main characters who do not use sign language go completely silent. It's like someone has hit the mute button by accident, so we see a lot but we hear nothing, and this gives us a small glimpse into Maya's world. But even then, from body language and gestures, we can intuit what is going on and what some of the characters are talking about. When Maya fights, the sound comes and goes, adding to the exhilaration and the chaos of being in the midst of the action as the bodies whirl around the room. Going back to her being deaf in this show, it's not a handicap and it's not treated as such. When she was a child, one bit part character was abrasive because of her deafness, and he suffered a vicious beatings at the hands of the Kingpin. After that, while it is an aspect of the character, it's not about her being deaf. One of my biggest pet peeves in any book, film or TV show is when they lead with the character's sexuality or something similar, as if being gay or deaf is their entire character, their whole personality, and that is all they are. Representation and equality is important, But why would anyone, real or fictional, want to be defined by a single parameter of their existence? Show me any real person who walks into a room and starts a conversation or leads on an email in that way. To be fair, they never focus on Maya's deafness or disability in the PR that surrounded this show. They never said something like featuring deaf character Echo. It was focused more on the pain that Maya had gone through, her difficult relationship with Wilson Fisk, her heritage, and so on. No one underestimates Maya because she is deaf. In fact, many people are scared of her, and they know she is powerful, and not because she's a strong female character who dominates every fight and always beats huge, accommodating stuntmen 5 times her size. Thankfully, that doesn't happen in this show. She can and she is beaten. It shows she's human, she can be vulnerable, and therefore she's not a female character that they built by starting off with all the things they thought she should have to make her strong, looking at no one in particular.
There are many ways to kill an orc. Come at me.
At one point, Henry, an ally and friend, says, "I'm worried for you and what you might become. Someone who could successfully lead a criminal empire because of what it would do to you and who it would put at risk, being the people that you care about that surround you." One thing I struggle with in this show is that Maya is quite closed off. I think it's down to the writing and not the performance. On one level, it makes sense, given what the character has been through. She can't trust anyone and almost never lets her guard down, but she's still kind of stiff. There are glimpses of humour and playfulness and a lighter side to her, but I think the issue is mostly down to time. They had to keep the train moving of the plot. They had to rush. See, we didn't get a lot of time for character, which was a shame. There are a couple of moments of vulnerability towards the end of this series, and Cox does a convincing job with what she's given. The other reason Maya is an effective, and I hate this term, but strong female character...
Dick move.
No, let's use a different term. I'm going to say convincing character, meaning someone that's layered and more realistic, up to a point at least, more on that in a second, is... The reason she's so effective is because she's full of anger. She's burning with this awful, all-consuming torrent of rage about the unjust murder of her father, and her desire for revenge drives her to extreme lengths. This goes to the point where Wilson Fisk, the kingpin himself, takes her under his wing because he sees a kindred spirit. Now that is a terrifying thought. Wilson Fisk admires someone for being a bit like him. There is a touching scene in the car where he admits to losing his father and how it defined his life, and how the pain he felt from it was like nothing from before. Now, of course, the difference was Fisk murdered his own father to protect his mother, but still, it was a good scene and a good moment. The biggest issue I had with this series was the attempt to mix in the spiritual with the street-level crime drama. While the Choctaw creation myths were interesting and completely new to me, it smacked a little bit of the writers bending it to suit the narrative of hoorah, women are awesome and amazing and powerful and they can do anything a man can do.
It's easy.
Little punk.
At first it wasn't too bad, but then we got lots of history lessons and flashbacks to Maya's ancestors. The payoff at the end was all about using her gifts that the ancestors had given her to be clever, cunning and resourceful. So I thought, aha, here we go, there'll be some clever plan where Biscuits and Henry and maybe old Scully execute different parts of it, stripping the Kingpin and his men of all their support, some kind of a double cross, but no, that didn't happen. Maya walked straight into the Kingpin's trap, got caught, disarmed, and her friends did their own thing, which indirectly help her, but not because of the way she's planned it. But then she uses her newly discovered magic powers, which she gives to her female friends, who can suddenly kick ass and they're suddenly super powerful for some reason. Even though none of that stuff before has been set up as a possibility. At no point did we see any of her ancestors giving their powers to others. Now the healing thing, which, while it was interesting, didn't seem to do a lot, except it threw Fisk off his stride. But that was all. He's still a maniac and a menace and a sociopath. She didn't even heal his eye, so he will never let go of his range. It defines him and it drives him. So what exactly was the point? Overall, this show was just okay. It was uneven. It suffered from being a show of two halves. It suffered from being too short and from the writers banging on about the message drum just a little bit too much. They had all the tools there to tell a good story. They had a great cast. I mean, I would watch it just for Charlie Cox in the one episode he's in and for Vincent D'Onofrio because they were awesome. But the show itself, it was just fine. And it kind of felt like a bit of a cul-de-sac and a dead end that doesn't really go anywhere, except with Kingpin continuing, as we know, in the new Daredevil show. So for me, Echo gets a very, very generous 2 out of 5 bags. Anyway, that's all from me. I'm off to watch Predator.